Okay, guys, so what we're going to do today is talk about the United States getting entangled in Vietnam. One of the things, hopefully I've been trying to set this up, but I want you to understand the the Great Society. About said Great Depression. Geez, what decade is it? The Great Society is this awesome idea. It's the culmination of 60 years of progressive thought in American society. But it's not going to work. Why? There we go, right button. this. Because this focus on combating communism. Now we've talked about the Cold War in terms of specific events, but I mean to illustrate, 1965. Where are we Cold War wise? Okay, we're can do math. 3 years off the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right. Right now, American bombers are still flying at failsafe points, about 100 miles outside the Soviet Union, 24 hours a day, waiting for the go code to go in and attack their targets inside the Soviet Union. American ballistic missile submarines stationed in Holyloch, Scotland, are, within a few hundred miles of their launch points to launch ballistic missiles into the Soviet Union. The Soviet submarines are patrolling off the east and west coast of the United States, waiting for them to get a go code to fire their missiles into the United States. Okay? Now we both have satellite programs. Okay, by 1964, we have the first generation of spacecraft on both sides. The Mercury program and the Vostok program for the Soviets, they've already been surpassed. We're getting ready to start our Gemini flights. 1964, the Soviets have already done their Voskhod flights. And so what we see is we're still challenging, the United States and the Soviet Union are still just kind of beating it out. Also by now, okay, they're battling it out. Also by now, you're going to get what's called the Sino-Soviet split. And what that is, and we talked about this, and some of this is a bit of a refresher course, but China wants to see itself as the leader of international communism. So it splits away from the Soviet Union and tries to compete. This is where we're challenging that bipolar world narrative of the world revolving around the United States, either the United States or the Soviet Union does. The issue is, that means that there's this chance for escalation. There's this chance for, as everybody competes, a proxy war to break out. And we see that in Indochina, okay? Now, if you remember, 1954, Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the French army is defeated, shocker there. And so they're thrown out. Well, 1956, the Geneva Convention, we agree, you can have free elections to determine how to unify the country. But then we prevent the elections. We say no because we're fully aware that there are enough communists, or at least, nationalists, more than communists, in the South that it will unify under South Vietnam. So we see in 1957 a communist insurgency beginning in South Vietnam, and this destabilizes the country. There are going to be terrorist bombings all over the country, some in Saigon, the capital. 400 government officials will be assassinated. The country is in a near state of anarchy. In 1961, and I should have had a picture, so let me pause it, and I will... Actually, you can just deal with me failing to search because wonderful Suddenlink internet, right? No, DM. Then Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, toured South Vietnam, as part of this, what is, what's going on in Vietnam? What can we do? What does the United States need to do? All right. And he met this man, Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem is an authoritarian dictator. This is a horrible person. Quite literally, when he, if you've ever seen the picture of the Buddhist monk immolating himself in protest to the government in Vietnam. Okay, now what that is, that's where he sets in the middle of the street, pours gasoline on himself, lights himself on fire. No Din Diem's first lady said next time they do that, they should let the government know so we can all bring marshmallows. This was a ruthless person. But LBJ calls him the Churchill of Southeast Asia. Why? Because he was seen as tough, ruthless, but most of all, anti-communist. Again, when I'm not just saying this so I get to cuss, but this philosophy of he may be a son of a bitch, but at least he's our son of a bitch. That encapsulates American attitudes towards the third world all the way up until 1991, if not today. Okay, if not today, outside the Cold War. Because it's this idea, yes, we're going to back people we should not back. Back people that are clearly against how we as a society, how we as a nation expect to do things. But he's not communist, that automatically makes it better. So Kennedy begins giving guns, weapons, military aid. In 1961, we already lay the seeds for our defeat. Spoiler alert, we lose the Vietnam War. Now, technically, we agree to just leave. We leave in 1973. In 1975, North Vietnam invades and takes over all of South Vietnam. That's why if you look on a map today, okay, it's not North or South Vietnam, it's just Vietnam. If you've never heard Saigon before, that's because you might know it better as Ho Chi Minh City. Spoiler alert, we lose the war. And we lose it because we don't know how to fight it. We don't understand the problems of a guerrilla warfare. We don't understand the problems of a culture on the other side of the planet that is radically different from ours. Okay? We don't do it because we suck at fighting a guerrilla war. Okay? Those that have had my 1103 or 1493 class know this. Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902. Okay? We're doing a lot of the same things and we're failing then, and we don't learn the lessons. It also doesn't help because of this Cold War mentality. The United States Army is trained to fight in Western Europe. We're trained to fight the Soviet Union. We're trained to fight a mechanized enemy. We're not trained to fight a guerrilla peasant force armed with a mixture of weapons, that hides among a sympathetic, I might add, civilian population. It's completely against what we've prepared for. So I say we sow our defeat because we enact what's called Operation Strategic Hamlet. And what we do is, the whole idea is, okay, well, how do we know that if this peasant is, if this peasant is hiding amongst the population, okay? Quite literally, they don't have uniforms. It's like, oh, I'm a civilian. I pick up an AK. Now I'm Viet Cong. Oh, I put it down and back to being a civilian. So the thought was, how can we separate the population from the National Liberation Front, what the North Vietnamese were calling themselves before it becomes the Viet Cong, or the South Vietnamese Communists, and the North Vietnamese Army. So we enact Operation Strategic Hamlet. And the idea is we're going to uproot you from this village that you have been born and raised in. Your parents had, born, lived, and died here. Your grandparents lived here. Your great-grandparents. In fact, your family goes back on this land since time immemorial. You don't have electricity. You don't really have connection to the outside world. There's obviously no internet. Al Gore has not invented it yet. There's no TV. There may or may not be radio. But you have connection to this land for 500 years. And without your consent, The United States will back the South Vietnamese government in coming in, removing you at the point of a gun, and resettling you at a place that is easier to defend. Easier to defend, and as you can see, surrounded by walls, bunkers, yada, 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 yada. Now, we say it's for their protection, and it is. We say that it's because we don't want the communists to come in and, do that, and, do what they can to, convert you to either to communism, because I just made it a religion, or, influence you, or, get some guerrillas in there. But the problem is this. In a hearts and minds campaign, which is how the United States will approach the war in Vietnam, we want to win your hearts, show you we care. We want to win your minds, show you that capitalism is better than communism. You don't do that by uprooting indigenous people from where they live, carting them off 100 miles, plopping them down, and saying, this is your land now. As I'm talking about this from an American context, how is this that much different than, say, Indian removal, the 1830s? Okay, people don't die in these resettlements, so there's that at least. But this creates bitterness, animosity, and look at it from the South Vietnamese peasant's perspective. I'm not saying peasant in a dismissive way, but quite literally the people they're uprooting traditionally wear black pajamas. That's just what peasants wore. They literally, you woke up, you farmed, you went home, you went to bed, that's your day, okay? You don't care what's going on in the outside world. You care is your rice paddy going to produce? Are your crops, are your fields going to make enough money or make enough food for you to survive? But now we have the choice. You have the choice of the National Liberation Front. Yes, the communists, who, okay, they're hard, they're assholes, but they mostly leave you alone. If you can't do anything for them, they don't care. But then here come the United States and the South Vietnamese government saying, we're here to help you. Pack your stuff. You don't get to live on your land anymore. We're uprooting you. We're disrupting your life. Oops. The United States is largely going to lose the war in Vietnam because we don't understand how the civilian populace works. We don't understand what goes on in the minds of the average Vietnamese people. And it's because we don't understand that quite literally we'll do things like this to help them, but the way we're doing it, we're trying to isolate them from the NLF, but instead we're creating sympathy. Oopsies. It also doesn't help that No Dinh Diem is a bully. He has no problem bullying his own people. He has no problem sending in armed guards to round these people up and forcibly evict them. This isn't a question of you get a chance. It's a you do it or the Diem government will shoot you. So Kennedy gets disenchanted and says, okay, the United States were not committed to a policy of assassination, but if this guy were to accidentally brutally cut his head off while shaving, that would be nice. That more or less becomes the policy of the United States government. Especially when we now take a more economic stance. We start putting our money where our mouth is. We create in 1955, the Military Assistance and Advisory Group. Okay. Well, you got to train the South Vietnamese Army, give them confidence. All right. This is before Kennedy, obviously. And the idea is we're going to train your Navy, which is coastal. We're going to train your Officer Corps. We're going to train it. We'll even train your Air Force. But that doesn't really work. Why? Because the South Vietnamese don't really care. That's also part of the problem. If we lose the war, there's several reasons why we lose the war. If one is because we don't understand the civilian mindset. Two is because the South Vietnamese really don't care enough. Okay? They're not interested in their own system. They're officers. It's nepotism, pretty much. It's, okay, I know you. I owe you money, so we'll wipe away the debt if I give you command of a rifle division. I was delivering papers before this, but okay. I know you. You married my sister's cousin, which would technically be my cousin. What? Father's, uncle's, brother's former roommate. Deal with it. No, I never said any of this had to make sense. I know you. You're related to me. Congratulations. You're a captain in the army. I know you. You're so-and-so's son. Congratulations. You're a major in the army. So the officer corps of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or the ARVN, is completely corrupt. Yes, there may be some good officers there, but you don't get promoted based on ability. It's who you know, how you know it, and does anybody got debts to pay off? So because the army can't combat this guerrilla, war, this guerrilla insurgency that began in 1957, we pump more and more money. February 8, 1962, we create Mobile or Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV. By 1963, 16,000 American advisors. I say advisors because it's not a case of, okay, I'm going to teach you what to do, go fight your battle. But in many cases, platoons or companies might have to be led by Americans, or battles directed by Americans, because the South Vietnamese cannot do it themselves. So now we have this vested economic interest, okay, well, we've been supporting them for years. We have this vested military interest, okay, 16,000 advisors, and they keep growing. And we have our old, our old Cold War interest. That is, we are scared to death of communism expanding. So it's only natural that the United States will somehow be drawn in. And so here's what that great question for historians. If Kennedy is not a fan anymore of No Din Diem, would Kennedy have fully escalated and committed to the war? But in the event Kennedy is going to be ousted, and it's kind of sad if you think about it, because, okay, as the Viet Cong, as they're now being called, the Vietnamese communists, the Viet Cong, grow stronger, Diem starts more and more repression, not just of the communists, but of his entire society. This idea, okay, we have to, no due process, no freedom of speech. We have to do everything we can. All right? Eventually, the ARVN leaders do grow dissatisfied. They say, okay, look, this is ridiculous. We have to do something to stop this. So, you get this guy Duong Von Min. I'm going to mispronounce half these names, sorry. And November 1 to November 2, 1963, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam stages the Saigon coup. They kill Diem. They kill a few other high-ranking officials, and they seize control. Now, remember what I said about Kennedy saying if he accidentally brutally cut his head off, right? Which that's actually a quote from Blackadder, but the TV show Blackadder. We knew it was going to happen. We had advance warning. Why? Because the CIA is already spying on people. This Cold War is, if anything, a war of espionage. I mean, how else do we get James Bond flicks? We knew about it. We could have warned Diem. We could have stepped in. We could have done something to prevent it. But we said, nah, let it happen. We don't care. Actually, we do care. We didn't want Diem there. And this was a way. So Diem is assassinated. Now what's ironic is 20 days after this, Kennedy will also be assassinated. And so it's just that weird thing of what would have happened had this not happened, what would have happened had Kennedy not been assassinated. It's what we call in history oh god, I just forgot what we call it. Well, that's embarrassing, but it's basically, you can't prove it. It's a hypothesis, but there's no way to prove it, so, why even bother? Alright? Wow, my historical training. Awesome. This is what happens, like 10 years after you took the class. Now, the issue is, the communists, believe it or not, the communists liked Diem, because he was so unpopular, that's why he was assassinated, that, they thought, okay, if Diem stays in, Maybe it will help unify the country to us. Maybe we can do this without bloodshed. I love this. I have not been yawning all day. I'm recording a lecture now. Jeez. It rained last night, so I'm thinking because the temperatures aren't gross outside, you know. They hope his new successor will be weak, but they don't know. So they have to do something to try to step it up, to step up the collapse of the South Vietnamese government. And so of that, and it's about a year, that's in November 63. The war continues. We keep putting more and more troops in. We start deploying aircraft. We start deploying ships. It's clear we're getting involved. And then August the 2nd, 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats engage the American destroyer USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. Okay? This attack was real. We have photographic evidence of it. Okay? Now, why do I have to say this attack was real? Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara presents this to Johnson, says, okay, we should get involved. And there was discussion in the Johnson administration that maybe the American public would not be sold on going into war because 3 torpedo boats attack an American destroyer. Okay, it's not enough. You know, I mean, the destroyer fired back with some of its light armament, but it's like the destroyer realistically was in very little to no danger. So the Johnson administration cooked up a second attack. Now this second attack, August the 4th, was staged. It never happened. But they edited it to make it seem like, yeah, there was another attack. Now, why do they do this? Why? Because remember, stepping up, after DM, you have 7 governments in 1964 alone. Okay? We're in an election year right now, 2016, okay? We have to deal with candidates and da-da-da-da. They're dealing with this one a month. Literally, it's month, boom, a guy's in, he falls out of power, somebody else comes in, he gets assassinated, somebody else comes to power. So they step up operations, and this, you know, just kind of happens. This attack just inadvertently happens. So because of this first attack, and then this second attack that the administration might not have, said 2 attacks, but they worded it suggesting it, okay? We get, on August the 7th, 1964, Congress passing one of the worst things in modern American history, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is what we typically refer to in World War I historiography as a carte blanche, or a blank check. It says the president can use any conventional military means to help any member of the Southeast Asia Collective Defense Treaty. Okay, well, what does that mean in English? Well, South Vietnam had signed that Collective Defense Treaty, so we're pledged to protect it, and we can use the military. All they say is you can't use nuclear weapons. Literally, everything else you can use. And so what this means is now the United States can get involved in Vietnam up to however much the president thinks. There's no time limit. This isn't a case like, okay, well, in 90 days it has to be reviewed. Or in 2 years it has to be reviewed. It just says any conventional means to help any member of the Southeast Asia Collective Defense Treaty. What that means is the president can expand the power of the army. He can send troops. He can reinstate the draft. And all without congressional permission. This is nicknamed the Fight If We Must Resolution. Because, and let me see. Oh, apparently I took out the photo. Oops. Sadly, I give variations of this lecture depending on the course I'm teaching. So sometimes I think a picture's in here that's not, so oops. But it was styled as a fight if we must. We did it. Well, we didn't want this, but we were attacked by the communists. We have to fight to defend Vietnam. And you can see that the fact is we're already doing it. 1962, We're starting to fly air support in support of ARVN troops. That's the kind of advisors we get. The advisors equipped with 1,000-pound bombs. Hope none of your advisors have that. That'd be kind of scary. Now, however, we're bound to the problems of Southeast Asia. Just as the Marshall Plan bound us to Europe. Never mind, again, what had been American policy of no foreign entanglements, no alliances. We're just going to look to our own borders. Marshall Plan, we're bound to Europe. Now we're bound to Asia. And we can fight a war there without a declaration of war. We're moving away from this because now war has this ugly stigma. We're moving away from this, I asked the Congress to declare that a state of war exists between the United States and blah, blah, blah. Now it's just, nope, we send them over there. So now we can send troops to Vietnam. And why we do this, in part... Oh, God, I am sorry. I should edit that out, but I figure it's probably more fun to, watch me yawn and make goofy faces. China, in October, so 2 months later, explodes their first nuclear bomb. Now, why I've put that in is if we look at Vietnam in the sense of containment, all right? China, now nuclear armed, is expanding. It's a threat. The North Vietnam is literally right on their border. So we need to be able to reinforce that we can project power right here. Don't do anything stupid. It's also because the Soviet Union and China both supply North Vietnam. So we have to then supply South Vietnam. It's that age-old idea of containment. Except whereas the Korean War was a direct, traditional military action, infantry, planes, tanks, the whole smash, this is going to be a guerrilla war. And in part, we don't want to widen the war. And that actually has several connotations. One, we don't want World War III, which few people really think this could go that far. But we don't want to piss off China. We don't want to get into further guerrilla war in the north. So if you look, we'll bomb the hell out of the north. And when I say bomb the hell, I mean we will drop so many bombs. It's almost unfathomable how many. But also, we will not engage in ground operations in North Vietnam. The majority of the war will be fought in South Vietnam. Again, as I said, excluding the air campaign. The first thing the president does is call for Operation Rolling Thunder. He does so in February 1965. And what we do is in March, begin bombing cities, bridges, military installations, all this stuff in North Vietnam. And this with the whole idea, we're going to bomb this stuff until you quit. We'll give you economic aid. We'll give you food if you quit. But if you don't quit, we will keep bombing your cities. Now, this is not unlike, especially those of you that just took my World War II course, or that hopefully are going to take it when I teach again in the August intersession. This is not unlike World War II. Okay? Total war. You take the war to the civilian populace, you bomb the cities, the people eventually get tired of the war, appeal to the government, and the government stops it. Except it doesn't work in World War II. The people of London never called for Britain to surrender. The people of Berlin never called for the people to surrender. Okay? Atomic bombs at work. We're not using atomic bombs. So we've done this before, but what makes this different is now, let's go back to what we've been talking about all week and last week, technology. 90% of households have a television. Wrong way. This thing behind me, this TV, right? To us, it's like, of course we've got one. Well, by the 60s, yeah, it's the same. It's, the TV dinner. It's now kind of customary. You eat your food watching television. It also doesn't help the time delay from Vietnam to the United States means that just as it's about dinner time, you can get live pictures from Vietnam. Now with the satellite system, it's not a case, you can do that. So now Satellites, meaning fairly quick communications. TV, exposure, a changing culture because of it. You can now witness the air war live on television. I'll post some clips from a documentary that it's a really good one. American Holocaust, the war in Vietnam. You can now see and watch live B-52s open their bomb bays and just bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb. How big a bomb load could these things carry? My granddad was a B-24 bomber pilot, and, so I should know this stuff, but I don't offhand. In part because, the number of bombs, literally, 70,000 pounds of weapons. 70,000 pounds. That's 35 tons of bombs. That's 35 2,000-pound bombs. Okay? I'm probably not going to drop that. But 71,000-pound bombs. Okay? Or if you just wanted to blanket an area, that's 140 500-pound bombs. Out of one bomber, 9 in a squadron, 21 in a group. I don't actually know if that's the numbers here. That's what it would have been in World War II, so I'm extrapolating. But, okay, let's say you got 9 bombers. We're going to carpet bomb. Okay, you don't have cruise missiles yet. 9 bombers, 70 1,000-pound bombs each. Okay, 70. That's 630 bombs. Boom, 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 boom. 630 bombs. 70,000 pounds of ordnance times 9 planes. 9 times 7 is 63. That's, I'm sorry, I can't do... See, this is what I try to do. I try to do math, and it just doesn't work. So let's do 70, 1, 2, 3 times 9. That's 630,000 pounds of ordnance. And you're watching this on TV. You can't edit it out. You can't see it. But what's even worse for the American public and for the American war effort is it works both ways. This is not a world war where the United States is not talking to Germany. Now you can have journalists in Hanoi from, unaligned nations. We can see what that 630,000 pounds of ordnance does to a city. We can see how it just obliterates villages. And what's worse, how much stuff do we drop? 7 million tons of bombs. Think about that for a second. 7 million tons. That is twice the number of bombs, okay, that all nations used in the Second World War. So we're talking bombing France, bombing Britain, bombing Germany, bombing Japan. No, we're dropping twice that all on South Vietnam. You want to know why there's war protests? They're simple. This is what's going to be called the living room war, okay? Because, it was literally coming on the nightly news. You could watch it. There's a number of video clips I'm going to show you. One of them from Maury Safer, who just, he was a correspondent. And he actually just died literally a few weeks ago. But he did this thing, the burning of Kham Ney. And what it showed, he's embedded with American Marines. They're doing their stuff. They come up to a village, and they burn the village down. And that's standard operating procedure. And he makes the point, we have this image from World War II of GIs. You give chocolate bars to the kids. Now we're pulling the kids out of their thatch roof huts and burning them down with flamethrowers. Okay? Vietnam is the war that will tear off that veneer of war being patriotic, of war being good, of war being, a fun adventure. Ladies in the class, if this were 1914, all right, you would not want to date a guy that had not been in war. Okay? Because that's how you proved your manliness. War was where men fought to get their manliness so they could go date beautiful women. Okay? But this shows that war is incredibly ugly. And I'm not anti-war by any means. I'm a military historian by training. But I am saying that this makes everyone see war for exactly what it is. We justify it, this idea of containment. Okay? We don't want communists to advance. But it's when you see aircraft dropping, what do we see here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and how many more bombs are in there? And you just see this on live television. Okay. When you see the guys embedded in the horrible realities of jungle warfare, which we'll cover next week. You can justify it, but the American public, it's going to turn their stomach and do it quick. And understand, right now, Vietnam is popular. I'm going to post links to a couple of short films that would have been broadcast on television, where you're going to get guys like John Wayne or Jack Webb selling the war to the American public. Okay? Most people liked the war in Vietnam in 1965 until they started watching it on TV. Until it just kept going on. And until the harsh realities of ending a guerrilla warfare, how do you know when it's going to be over? Okay, World War II. Well, now we're in North Africa. Now we're in Sicily. Now we're in Italy. Now we're in France. France is close to Germany. We're starting to win the war. You don't have those kind of, reassurances that the war has X left time to run. And so the public is going to sour on it. April 1965, we send 60,000 more troops. The South Koreans send troops. The Australians send troops. Now, why Australia? Because that domino theory, they're afraid communism's going to come to them. I love how I make communism sound like it's this old, dark brotherhood rogue that's just going to come stab you in the middle of the night. So you're communist now. But that's literally kind of how people are thinking. Your actions have been watched from afar. Observed from afar, there we go. There's no clear military strategy. How the hell do you win this thing? Nobody knows. Nobody knows how exactly you're going to do this. We know that we don't want to widen the war. We know we don't want to do things like go into Cambodia. So the North Vietnamese are like, well, we're going to go through, Cambodia then. If you have heard of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, what that is Vietnam kind of bulges out like this, right? And here's Cambodia. Well, if we're going to fight here, okay, but the North Vietnamese says, let's just go through Cambodia. We know they don't want to widen the war. Let's just do that. So we become reluctant to intervene. We eventually will. Where you don't want to widen the war. We don't want to, piss off China. So we don't send our best stuff. We don't send our best equipment. And there's also the fact Johnson wants to do the Great Society. And he cannot fully fund a war while at the same time giving people tax cuts and tax breaks. So something has to give. And then we get, in November, the Battle of the Ia Drang, which if you've ever seen We Were Soldiers, this is the battle memorialized in the movie. And why I mention this, November 14 to 18, 1965, is although it's the second major battle of the Vietnam War, there had been a smaller action earlier, it's really this one that sets the tone for how most of the operations are going to be conducted. We see the use of, new equipment, and we see that, again, one battle, we see how the rest of the war is going to go, but nobody, pays attention. One, we rely on helicopters, okay? These are new. We're relying on these Hueys. You can have air mobile cavalry. Rather than march your guys up and have a clear front line, we need to go check out this village. We need to go check out the stuff. Chopper guys in, land them, they get out, they fight, they do their stuff, hop in, and go back. Not quite how it works, but so goes the theory. We see that the United States is going to take massive casualties. More and more people will survive being wounded, but this is going to be an incredibly bloody war. If we look for the Vietnamese, we see that not only can they fight, in this case, the North Vietnamese army is well trained, it's well disciplined, they have decent equipment. And again, if we don't bring, say, our tanks, well, they don't have tanks either. Well, doesn't matter. They will take horrendous losses. And I say horrendous because if you imagine, yeah, they might be decently armed. We might not bring our tanks, but we bring in a ton of air support, a ton of artillery. Okay, we are still, we are an industrial power. They are not. We can produce our own stuff. We can put out this stuff. We win by overwhelming firepower. That's our doctrine. There's also the issue that Ho Chi Minh, and I know this is going to upset some people, but I literally, I can talk apparently, modeled himself after George Washington. What I mean by that is he realized it doesn't matter if you lose battles. Just keep the army alive. And eventually your enemy will quit. Well, that's what George Washington does. If you look at the War of American Independence, we lose more battles than we win. Washington is not the best military commander. Oh, sure, Princeton, Trenton, he'll have some great stuff. But, he also, gets his butt kicked a lot. But he keeps the army alive. He doesn't let the dream of a revolution die because there is no army. And that's what is going to happen with the Vietnam War. They will take stupefying losses that anybody else would say, okay, that's it. But they will keep fighting. And so what we get is we, the United States, believe we can win the battles. We have the better technology, better air support, better artillery. We say that, look, we can do a war of attrition. The Vietnamese had a tactic called grab them by the belt buckle. They realized that, okay, if here's a position, we'd put a shield of artillery. Well, much like you grab somebody by the belt buckle, get in close, we can't call our artillery. They could counteract some of this stuff. And so we get this idea of a war of attrition. What does that mean? Literally, kill enough people and eventually they'll quit. We start getting this war fought on the idea of a body count. But now put yourself thinking, and we'll get into this more when we get into how the Vietnam War is fought. We're the good guys, right? We're the United States. We're always the good guys. So why are we touting how many people we killed? That's doesn't set well with a lot of people. I threw this up just as a thing for your notes, but if, again, domestic versus foreign policy. When you think of Abraham Lincoln, you think of the Civil War. But what foreign policy? You think of Reagan, Cold War. What domestic policy? Okay, Reaganomics. Okay, yeah, but though my favorite Reagan policy, we'll talk this. It's the ketchup as a vegetable scandal, and I realize it's kind of just not. It's dry because it's serious, and you can't really joke that much about it. Though I should use sight gags, which okay. I have a random ladies. I have a random question. Things I don't understand. It's a hairbrush, right? How do you break one of these? I had to buy a new one because my wife literally brushing her hair, and I guess it just got tangled up, and she literally broke the hairbrush in half in her hair. I'm starting to think there's too much iron in the water, but yeah, I don't know. But my favorite Reagan story is need to make cuts. Okay, so let's cut the Department of Education. Well, how can we do it? Well, school lunches are kind of expensive. Fresh vegetables are kind of expensive. How do we get around this? I know. Ketchup is technically fruit, but close enough. They wanted to say vegetable, even though, yes, technically it's a fruit. So what they said is, okay, take a school hamburger, right? Put an inch thick of ketchup on it, just enough ketchup, and it would meet the dietary requirements for a vegetable. And then you would not have to give the kids vegetables that day. It caught on for a bit until people got upset. Then they rescinded it. And I was actually talking about this last semester. A student pointed out. And I just researched, and yeah, the Department of Education is actually bringing that back. If you have enough of a tomato-based sauce in with the school lunch, it technically counts as a serving of vegetables. So, if any of you have ever had a burger with just tons of ketchup, maybe that's why, I don't know. Think Bill Clinton, great domestic policy. Foreign policy? Well, okay, Kosovo, Somalia, but I mean, realistically, you know, what is it? His advisor said it's the economy, stupid. Focused on domestic policy. Bush, war on terror. How does his domestic policy do? Johnson has to make a similar choice. The war in Vietnam or the Great Society. The problem is he's going to try to do both. Try to continue those reforms while fighting Vietnam on the cheap. And that's why we have this air campaign. Because it's cheaper to drop 7 million tons of bombs than it is to send tanks and, hundreds of thousands of troops. Also makes us a lot less popular. So again, add that to the reasons why do we lose the war in Vietnam. So we see that, why this is doomed from the get-go. If we look at just the basic problems of if you want to start a war. Johnson wants a liberal agenda. He's a progressive. Of course he does. But he wants a conservative budget. Well, you can do that so long as there's not a war to trip it. Proxy wars traditionally are not popular. It starts out popular. But by 1966, and for sure by 67, that popularity is starting to wane. Kennedy, before he died, cut taxes. You've been invoking, well, Kennedy wanted this, Kennedy wanted this, Kennedy wanted this. Well, if I cut taxes, well, Kennedy wanted, or if I raise taxes, Kennedy wanted them cut. Oops. So you can't do that. What all of this means, and, this is a case of Vietnam is both influenced by and influences this. The 1960s become just a hugely turbulent decade. Everything changes. You've got the war in Vietnam. You've got the space race. Societal revolution. Drugs become really, really common. I'll actually, just for laughs, I'll post the thing. It's actually British. But the governments were starting to do experiments on LSD. Specifically, A, what does it do to the human body? B, how do people react to it? C, can we weaponize this? And so, one of the things they did, this is actually British, but they gave Royal Marine Commandos LSD and then sent them out into the field with loaded guns to have fun. The results are humorous at best. Nobody dies. The one person does have a bad acid trip. Another guy tries to cut down a tree with a shovel. It's kind of funny. But if that's what the government's doing, there are many, 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 many people also using drugs. We see a cultural shift. This anti-establishment feeling. And so what we see is the war in Vietnam could not have happened literally at a worse time. Things are changing, too much stuff going on, it's a delicate balance, and Vietnam provides the tipping point. As for the Great Society, simple. Liberals don't like the war in Vietnam, so they're not going to support Johnson. Conservatives don't like the Great Society. It's communism. So they don't support him either. And so both initiatives are going to fail. And it doesn't help that while I mentioned that it is popular, protests start really, really quick, especially on university campuses. Why? Because remember, universities, this is where a lot of people could go to escape the draft. The teach-in was common. It was modeled on the civil rights movement sit-in. If I were to host a teach-in, what would happen? You'd come to a classroom, you get all your friends to come to a classroom, you guys would sit where almost nobody could move, and you would listen to me rail after hours for about an hour or two about how the Vietnam War sucks. Okay? And the idea is to spread, to spread awareness. Now, I love this photo. Why? This is a protest rally at the University of Madison. And why I show this is there's a documentary that I'm going to have you watch Monday called 2 Days in October, redone by the BBC as Why America Lost the Vietnam War. And it talks about 2 consecutive days in October 1967, where we see the worst American military defeat of the war, the Battle of Ong Tan, and where we see the first major student protest at a university campus that led to police involvement and literally leads to just an outbreak of violence. And, again, starts off popular, some protest, and then it just slides down. Sorry, I said University of Madison. I guess that's University of Michigan. Had a Madison one, but eh. But, okay, so University of Michigan. This is the first really big. March 24, this coincides with Rolling Thunder. Eventually, faculty, what they would do, they would, cancel classes, do these seminars. Be thinking of, hey, you don't have to listen to me lecture about whatever today, but come listen to me talk about why Vietnam sucks. I was, by the way, correct. University of Madison is the one with the documentary. I saw took a gamble, I lost. Again, I have so many photos that I tend to forget sometimes which ones are which. Now, this starts at the University of Michigan, and it spreads all over the nation. And it's why? Because of Rolling Thunder, because of the shift to, we're not advisors anymore, okay? Or at least soon we're not going to be. And as we take on a bigger share of the war, and eventually the ARVN is, from about 1966 to 1968, not really going to do that much while we fight the bulk of the war. The protest will sharply increase. Now, if I talk to you about war protests, some of you might think, okay, well, war in Iraq. Though a lot of you are, getting really too young for that. I mean, I know for me, the war in Iraq, Iraqi freedom seems like just yesterday. I realize, it's 13 years ago, and my friend and I were arguing about it our, last few days in high school. I just dated myself. But for most people, you think of the war in Vietnam. But it's actually not that new. If we look historically, we tend to protest a lot of wars. Okay? We can see, American Revolution. All right? Statistically, a third supported it, a third didn't, a third honestly could not care each way. And the third that didn't support it actually supported Great Britain, the Loyalists. War of 1812. So unpopular with the North, we get the Hartford Convention, where the North threatens secession. The Mexican War. So unpopular, there will be some protest. What is it? I think it's Henry David Thoreau will be jailed refusing to pay his income tax, or pay taxes on something. No income tax yet. He refuses to pay taxes on something as a sign of protest. The Civil War. Some people loved it, some people hated it. But, I mean, it's, from any given year to year, it's either, all right, we've got to crush the South, to just let the South go, to now let's have draft riots because to hell with this. World War I, there's going to be things like this. The women's peace delegates. We don't want to enter World War I. There's even going to be the American Peace Mobilization created in 1940. You're going to have protests in 1941. Can the people win peace? Organize for peace? Wire right President convoys? President convoys, jeez. President Roosevelt, no American Expeditionary Force. You'll literally have people protesting outside, the White House just a couple of months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. This has been a common thing in American history. But because you can report on it. Okay, well, let's go Civil War back. You can just bury it in a newspaper or don't report on it at all. So people never know how widespread it is. They can look like crazy people. You can do, World War I. Again, take a picture, put it in the back of paper, that's it. World War II, same thing. Okay, you might talk about it on the radio, but you can minimize it. But now, in the era of mass communication, in the era of media, TV, radio, all this stuff, now you can see it, you can hear it, and you can realize that, hey, A, it's more common than I thought, but also B, if you see it enough, it looks bigger than you thought. Then what we're going to see is actually, statistically, not that many people are going to protest. I mean, they're not going to be that as widespread as what you would think. But you have the appearance. That's the vocal minority, the appearance. that so many people are protesting, obviously the war must be bad. And that will then influence others into not supporting the war. So why I'm mentioning all this is we're starting to get this thing, geez, that's a technical term, put that in an example. This thing, we're starting to move to a point where we're getting, obviously we're entangled in Vietnam. We're not fully committed yet. We're not. It's not a declaration where we're sending troops. Our role is ill-defined, but we're already setting up the fact that it is popular in the United States. In 1965, probably as many demonstrations against it, you could literally find patriot parades in support. But the seeds are there that if things don't work according to plan, or if things get worse, then the bottom will fall out and the whole system will come apart. And so that's why what we'll do is let's go ahead and wrap it up for today. Next time, I'll post that documentary for Monday and watch it and take notes, because it's really going to set up how the Army fights in Vietnam, how we don't do so effectively, what the people who were there thought, but also it'll show realistically, just as a foretaste, in this student protest at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, the police are called, and the police will send a number of kids to jail, and it's very telling, I think, to quote one of the students, you could hear the billy clubs, and it sounded like they were breaking watermelons, but that was just them on the backs of students. You hear cops say, well, if I had to break his kneecaps, you want to make sure a student doesn't want to come back. And if you had to do that to break his kneecaps, then that's just what you did. And that's what he's saying 30 years later. And then you get this one guy, he's a first sergeant who survives this battle. And he says, they thought they were patriots. They didn't do anything, but they weren't. And if you ask me, every last one of them should be stood up against the wall and shot. He goes, I know that's harsh, but it's how I feel. We're quickly coming to a society that has had consensus rammed down its throat since 1945, and the society is literally about to come unglued over the issues of the Vietnam War. And so it's with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. We'll pick up next time with the documentary, and I will see you in the next video. All right, have a good one, guys. As I realize that, there we go, now have a good one.